listen to this podcast.
You'll want to look at that.
Okay, that one.
That one, yep.
Listen here.
And welcome back to the Audacious podcast, the show where the deep discussions are just as good as the spicy hot takes. I'm Talon Bowman, your host of the show. I'm very excited for this episode, for I have two amazing gentlemen with me as guests. And if you notice, we are in a little bit of a different studio, a different venue for recording this. We had a little bit of complications with our previous studio, but for next week, we'll be back there. Everything will be A-okay. We're just in a little bit of a different setup today. Today, I have with me Ty Henson. How are you doing today?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
Doing amazing. Thank you for asking. And we also have the first ever returning guest on the show, Grant Swafford, ladies and gentlemen.
Hey guys, good to be back.
Yes, it is so good to have you back. We are in week 2 of our Help and Healing series. And if you missed week 1, last week we had Micah Tassi and Ethan Waybrett on it to talk about why we have a tendency to suffer alone. It was an amazing episode, great discussion. Leading into that, we are going to be diving into anxiety in today's episode. Anxiety is something that a lot of people struggle with, but don't even know the root of, don't even know why they do. It can come upon a person very suddenly, very out of nowhere. And once it does, it's very hard to know how to deal with it in a way that's healthy, in a way that will lead to growth and eventually lead out of it. Because a lot of people's solutions nowadays is medication. And medication isn't a bad thing, but ultimately it's not the solution that's going to help people get over anxiety. So today we're going to be talking about the root of anxiety, how we can go through a journey of overcoming it, and why we don't want to allow it to rule our lives. Very excited for today's episode. But before we do jump into it, I'd like to introduce our two guests a little bit better. So Ty, if you would, go ahead and tell us your major, your hometown, and your favorite cereal.
Oh, my favorite cereal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Hi, I'm Ty. I am a psych major. I have a human development and family studies minor. I am from the good old Shelby, North Carolina.
Let's go.
Whoop, whoop, where my liver mush eating people at.
What?
Oh yeah, we can get into that later.
Okay.
And my favorite cereal is it's gotta be Cocoa Puffs. Or you know those little chocolate chip cereal things? I don't think you do.
Sort of.
Oh, wait,
They look
like the
chocolate.
cookies?
Yeah, the cookies.
Oh, yeah.
And they have like
What are
the
those
wolf as the mascot.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
100%.
I have it as a thought in my mind, but I can't.
I don't remember, but
Okay,
yeah,
hey.
we know what you're talking about.
We'll talk about this afterwards.
I'll put it up on the screen. There it is. And we also have Grant Swafford, of course, and you've already introduced us a couple of episodes back
Yeah.
into more of yourself, but go ahead and remind us
Redo it.
your major,
Okay.
your hometown, and your favorite soda.
Oh my gosh, no. Can I do favorite cereal?
Sure, go ahead.
Because I don't drink soda.
That's fine. Yeah.
Like it's all. Anyway, I'm Grant. I'm a psychology major, and I'm from Spartanburg, South Carolina. Even though I was born in Memphis, Tennessee. I think Spartanburg's better, but it's okay.
Dang.
And yeah, favorite cereal. Man, Cinnamon Toast Crunch. That's the stuff.
Ooh,
Like the original.
okay.
I know they have like the chocolate version.
Oh, yeah.
And the other ones, no. Like the original, that's it. That's the
I
one.
get that.
They
I
peaked.
get it.
They peaked there. They tried to do too much.
Yeah. Hearing y'all talk about this is making me flashback to a memory I have from being a camp counselor last summer. Wednesday nights during dorm time, we would always have a cereal bracket with the campers where we had pitched like 32 cereals up against each other and talk about which cereal was the best. But as camp counselors, sometimes we would have bias in judging who would win based on the discussions from the campers. There was one time where we literally pushed Wheaties to first place.
No way.
Why would you do
Why
that?
would you do that?
For the bit,
Monster.
bro. For the
No,
joke.
that's
the
terrible.
breakfast of champions. I'm just
Okay,
saying.
but I will say Wheaties isn't terrible.
It's not terrible.
Have you ever had Wheaties?
Yes, I've had Wheaties.
Are you talking about they're not terrible in concept or in application?
in application.
In concept, they're great.
I
But
think
in
that-
application, no. No.
Listen.
No. This is like your hot take now.
No, my
This
hot
is a very hot take.
Nope, we're
No,
saving that hot
We're
take.
saving
know.
that.
I know.
Wow.
But the amazing part of it was just seeing like how invested the campers got into it, and just how upset they were once Wheaties won. Like they were still
Wow.
upset about it the next day, and I'm like,
Wow.
dang.
No, I get it though. I'd be upset if my boys, the chocolate chip boys, didn't make it. The wolf guy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
whatever the name is.
Yeah.
No, but Grant, it is so good to have you back.
It's good to be back.
Yes. And of course, there is one question left for both of my guests, and you know what it is. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump into it. So, Grant, actually, we've already heard your hottest take.
Okay.
So go ahead and give us another one of your hot takes.
This one actually might be a more hot take.
Ooh.
Oh,
I think
no.
it might have.
I don't know. Your last one was pretty out there.
You have a lot of hot takes.
Mine last time was just that everybody's allowed to like one thing that's objectively not great, but they enjoy.
And it was tied into a very specific movie, which if you want to find out, you can check out Grant Swafford's episode on combating legal.
And I got like made fun of for 10 minutes for it.
Are you serious?
Yes.
Whoa.
Okay, but my other hot take, which is also movie related,
Okay.
is I disagree with the blanket statement that the books are always better. I
Oh.
really, really, really do.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd even disagree with the statement that the books are usually better.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And this is coming to you as someone who loves to read.
Yeah.
Like I just finished like an 1,000-page book, so it's not like I struggle with a lot of plot and exposition and stuff. I just think the movies a lot of times do sometimes better, but a lot of times at least on par. I really do. I'm not going to name specifics because I probably get booed out of the studio, but
Yeah. So when you say better, do you mean in terms of the entertainment the audience gets from it, or the vision that the author had in creating the book? Because there's a lot of difference between an author's original vision and the adaptation to the screen sometimes.
no, that's
So
fair.
fair.
I would give an example, and I'm not saying that in this case the movie's better than the book.
Okay.
But I think The Return of the King's movie ending was 10 times better than the book. The book is great. It's so good. But in the movie, it's like, oh, ring, volcano, blow up,
Yeah.
everybody's happy, and they have like a little celebration. In the book, it's like, and then afterwards, they go back to the Shire, and there's like a whole extra mini battle where all the little hobbits. I just think that the movie, like in that instance, there's sometimes movies have to really cut out a lot of the fluff sometimes and decide what's really important. And sometimes that's a good thing.
Yeah.
It's like a more streamlined experience.
Yeah.
And I think there's also something special about in movies you have the audio and the visuals.
Right. A
And
more impactful resolution.
I think you
almost.
can like feel it on more fronts than a book, which isn't to say like I love books, and I think there are a lot of books that do things a lot better than the movies. And there have been movies I've watched where I'm like, dang it, they cut that. Like it, yeah. But that's just my take.
That's fair.
I mean, I kind of agree with it. I mean, like, look at Dune 2. Dune 2, and I'm going to say this to the audience. Dune 2 created a much better ending for the Dune book. Dune's ending made Dune Messiah, the sequel book, have to be made. With the ending of Dune 2, that sequel movie doesn't need to happen because the story's over. It can be over.
I kind of disagree.
Really?
Because I think the second movie ended on a cliffhanger. Like, I was not satisfied with the ending. It was great, but I also think it ended on, like, big cliffhangers.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Well,
So,
I think Dune Messiah's. So in the books, Chani doesn't leave, right? She does not leave him. She's
that's
sticks with
Zendaya,
him.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
She
Spider-Man's girlfriend.
Yeah, Spider-Man's girlfriend.
Yep.
Fake Spider-Man.
So-
Anyway.
Whoa.
Okay. Anyways, whoa, keep off of that.
Yeah. So she doesn't leave him in the book, and instead, the entirety of Dune Messiah is showing us that Paul's not the hero. When in Dune 2, we see through Chani that he's not the hero.
Yeah.
That's why I think like Dune Messiah isn't necessary, other than like the war.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like for the big screen adaptation.
No, agreed. Agreed. Yeah.
I would have trouble saying whether or not a book or a movie is better because there's such different mediums of entertainment.
That's true. That's
With
how I
a
feel
book-
about like the Hunger Games.
Yeah.
I put those on equal.
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
I think the books add a few extra nice details, but I
Right.
think the movies, again, you get to see it and experience it.
Yeah. With a book, your imagination is allowed to fill in a lot of those gaps that the author sometimes intentionally leaves out. Like I know for the Book of Dune, you're just like thrown into the world and all of the world terminology without any context. And so your mind sort of has to figure out, okay, what the heck is going on? But then a movie is much more streamlined. It's a much narrower, condensed experience that shows every single detail. Right? Because when you watch a movie, your imagination isn't like actually filling in the gaps as much because you already see all of the gaps filled in by the director and the story that they're telling, which I'm passionate about cinematography, so I love that.
Yeah.
But they're two very different mediums, so I'd say unless very extreme circumstances, that it's harder to say which one's better.
No, that's true. I just think every time there's any kind of movie adaptation of any popular book, everybody's just kind of like, oh, here we go.
Yeah.
You know, like whenever the new Percy Jackson series came out, like I'm not a huge Percy Jackson fan, but I remember everybody was already like, oh my gosh, everybody's just pre-mad because like this won't be good.
Yeah.
Movies are always worse. I disagree. I'm like, I think that movies have a lot of potential. And again, like you said, like with Dune and some stuff like that, sometimes they can really improve on that medium. And again, like I think Lord of the Rings cut a lot, but I think like the intro to Fellowship of the Ring, it was better than the book. It set up things a lot better. Well, because the Galadriel, the Galadriel monologue was not in the book. The whole history lesson, it's instead somewhere else with just this extended like exposition dump scene a few chapters later. I think it made a better intro.
That's a crazy take.
Wow.
That's a wild one. Okay. Ty, how about you? What is your hottest take?
You guys have all heard my hottest take, so I'm going to give you a new one. Oh, yeah.
Oh.
My hottest take is that donuts are the most terrible thing in the universe.
What?
I hate donuts with a passion. I think donuts are... It's just sugar and bread. You can get better than sugar and bread.
What's wrong with sugar and bread?
It's not good.
What?
It's just fried sugar and bread. It's... I just...
Okay.
My
I
heart
can't.
hurts.
I can't with it.
It's okay.
So
We're all wrong sometimes.
I applaud you for admitting that you're wrong. So
Okay.
I also can't eat 90% of donuts. So, like, just give me this one.
okay.
Yep. No, but you did have like a hot take that you did want to share.
I did.
Aside from that one, right?
Yeah. It also has to deal with movies.
Okay.
I think honestly, what matters more to me in a movie being good isn't the a groundbreaking story. I think a lot of times we get so like bogged down with like the groundbreaking story. What I care about is that if a movie's fun. Like I think sometimes we like care so much for a groundbreaking story or like a story that has everything put together that we honestly just start trashing on the movie and forget to have fun with it. So like I just watched Godzilla X Kong and man, I gotta say, the most fun I have had in a movie in a long time. And I watched Dune 2.
Yeah.
I loved Dune 2 because I loved Dune. But I'm like, it was so much fun. I turned my brain off for like 2 hours and just experienced monkey fighting giant lizard. The plot made zero sense. Like, does it make sense? No, not at all. Are a lot of the points in there just like, oh, and this happened so the plot could progress? Or literally anti-gravity so that we could have an anti-gravity fight. And I'm like, I am here for it. This is... I'm like, honestly.
Like, whoa, anti-gravity just got invented for this one fight.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful. It's so much better than anything Marvel has put out in the past few years.
No, that's fair.
That's not a high bar.
Well, so long as we keep No Way Home as a good one.
No Way Home's good.
And Shang-Chi was good
Anyways.
too. But wait, okay, do you have an example that's like not the MonsterVerse? Because I feel like all those movies walk in and you know what to expect. Is this just movies where you know what to expect? Or are you talking about like this was hyped up as like The Flash, you know, with like, oh, this will be the next Dark Knight. It was just really dumb.
Oh, I think, I mean, like, I really enjoyed The Croods too. I'm not going to lie. It was fun. I watched it in theaters. There were only 4 of us in the theaters, everyone that I went with. And it was fun, and I liked that. And then there are things like Justice League, where I'm like, this isn't great.
fun,
You're
yeah.
trying to make a compelling story, and you're failing. I would rather you have some really cool fight scenes instead of a lot of subpar ones. So
No, I'll give you that. Like, as long as you kind of know what you're expecting, I think that's fair. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. What about movies that are more focused on not so much having fun, but about telling a true story that's not fun? I'm thinking like Oppenheimer, right? That's not a fun movie, but it's a story based upon the development of that bomb. And people need to know what happened in history, right? So like historical movies, ones that aren't necessarily about fun, but are more about the story.
Yeah, I think to make those stories truly good, you have to follow history and you have to do it in such a way where you're honestly like, you're not so much focused on like, I'm going to make a masterpiece. You're focused on, I'm going to tell this story. And honestly, more than the story, you're focusing on characters. You know what I mean? Those movies are good, and I appreciate those movies. But I also think too much of those movies just lead us to forget to be in a place where we can have fun. And we can forget to be in and like those movies require a lot of brain power.
That's true.
And honestly, like I have fun with them occasionally. I do. Like it's why I haven't watched Oppenheimer yet. I'm like, it's neat, but when I have the chance to watch a movie, I want to watch something where I can relax.
Right.
And like there are times where like it's not that. Like I'll watch Pride and Prejudice or Persuasion because those are good stories and they're very story driven. But it's also romance and I like romance. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think it really boils down to what you're looking for in going to see a movie. For you,
fair.
fun is like your main priority. And that's not a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
For a lot of other people, it can be different things. For me, I love cinematography. So I always am immersed with seeing different creative ways that the director can shoot different scenes. So Dune 2, I was geeking out about that movie because it has so many amazing jaw-dropping shots. So good. And then other people will go and see movies because they want to be immersed in a story. They want to be immersed in a different world. Like you can think historical dramas. If you haven't seen Chernobyl, you need to. Everybody needs to see
that's
that.
such a good series.
For real.
Never seen that.
You've never seen it, you
Oh
need
my
to.
gosh, you
brother.
need to watch it.
Yes.
Okay.
Like in the opposition of what you're saying, it's not a fun series.
Yeah.
But it's so grounded and it's so good.
Yeah.
And it really lets you see like, oh my gosh, when this happened in history, when this nuclear plant like exploded like that, what the environment, what the reaction would have been like. They're so detailed with it and it's so good. And then you have people that will go to theaters for thrillers, right? And thrillers, like for me, they can give you anxiety. Like I don't know if y'all saw like Puss in
Yeah.
Boots too.
That
Oh
was such a
my
good
gosh.
movie.
It was such a good
So
movie.
Yeah, it was
but
so
like
good.
legit, with the first scene that
incredible.
like the wolf comes in, I was
Yes.
feeling a little bit
Oh
of
my
that
gosh,
anxiety.
Such a good villain. Like kudos to Pixar. Not Pixar. I'm sorry.
Whoa!
Kudos to DreamWorks. Like forget Disney. Sorry. I'm sorry.
You did not just say that.
We're on the Disney hate train. We're on the we
Yeah,
love
we are.
DreamWorks.
Yes,
I'm sorry.
DreamWorks
Can't
is
believe
so
I said
good.
that.
They re-released Shrek.
they did.
Shrek 2, I
Yeah,
think.
and it. How much did it make again?
I don't remember.
Ridiculous amount of money.
It did.
because it's just that good.
Yeah.
It's that good.
Really good.
So
Also, hey, watch Puss in Boots 2. You won't regret it. It's on streaming right now.
No, I can confirm because you were on to me about it for like months. Like every single day after you saw it, I'd be like, dude, Puss in Boots 2. And then when I watched it, I was like, okay.
Yeah.
No,
I get it
and
now.
you complained to me.
Because you
were
wouldn't
like-
stop talking about it.
Yeah, you were like, oh, all you talk about is Puss in Boots 2. And I'm like,
For
'cause it's
days.
good.
For like weeks.
It's based.
But yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, I can see the two of you completely hosting a film podcast and knocking it out of the park.
Hey man,
I'm just
I'm
saying.
down.
I'm
so
down.
Y'all are so passionate about it. I love it. But yeah, it really depends on what you're looking for in a movie.
Yeah,
For me, I don't care for thrillers or horror movies because
Okay.
I'm not
Yeah, no,
looking
horror.
to be anxious or fearful in a movie when I'm going to see it. I stay away from that.
Yeah.
Was that a segue?
Huh? Speaking of anxiety, let's jump into just discussing anxiety and how prevalent it is in today's culture.
Yeah.
Especially after the COVID pandemic, you think that you've seen such an increase in anxiety and people not knowing where it's coming from, people not knowing how to handle it. And it's like a dependency on medication rather than figuring out what are healthy habits for me to be able to overcome this. How can I actually get down to the root of it? And I think a lot of people don't understand the root of it because anxiety comes and goes in waves. So it's almost like you can never predict it. But deep down, what really is the root of anxiety? What makes it so strong? Where does it come from?
I'll let you start on that one if you want to.
Yeah. So Obviously, being a psych major, I've been through all of the courses and everything. But there are so many different causes for individual anxieties, right? And so we have that, right? But in my opinion, a big root in all of this is lack of control. Really, so much of our anxiety comes from a fear that we're not in control of the situation and that things are going to go wrong because of it. I think of like social anxiety. That's fear of control of the situation. Like, what if these people hate me? You know what I mean? And I think that can all be boiled down to lack of control. And there are lots of other specific things that can go into it too, right? And even like biological stuff, not even just like neurotransmitters, but like with your heart rate, like your brain can't really tell the difference between exercise, your heart rate increasing from exercise and your heart rate increasing from anxiety, or your heart rate increasing from attraction. So that's why a lot of like relationships, it's kind of hard at the very beginning because your brain doesn't understand the difference. You know what I mean? So there's a lot that goes into it. But if I had to say there was one overarching thing that branched, I would say that it's lack of control or fear of losing control. I'd say that's where all of it comes from. And it's so strong because when we are in that situation where we don't have control, that means something else has control over us. And in our ideas, something else having control over us is the worst case scenario. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that's definitely, especially with how grounded anxiety is in the future, too.
yeah.
Like, that's where lack of control really comes into play, you know? Like, I think you especially see it, like, as people are going into college and just throughout college as they're figuring out, what's my major? Where am I going to go? After college, like, what's my career going to be? Relationships, just being taken away from your situation back home, friends, family, all of that, and being dropped in a totally new environment. And so I think what makes it so strong is that sometimes that lack of control, like that's reality. It's a recognition that you don't have control. And so what can really cause anxiety is the thought that, like you said, something else is controlling you. But also, if I don't have control, then it's out of control, right? I think that's where your faith really has to come into play. You're trusting God, recognizing, yes, that's exactly right. I don't have control, but I know that God does.
Yeah.
And I think we forget that really, really fast. I think that's what the enemy tries to tell us is, oh, you don't have control. It's almost as if God has put you here and then left you. I was reading this morning in Genesis where God makes his covenant with Abram before he was Abraham. And it was like the second time he'd made the same covenant with him, which I thought was interesting. I was kind of like, why did God like come back and basically like reestablish the covenant? He does it several more times later. I think it's kind of like what we talked about last time when I was on the podcast, how God delights in reminding us. And also God recognizes that we need that kind of reminder because we're so quick to forget. I think in every situation of anxiety I've been through, God has brought me out the other side. And I can look back and see how faithful he has been. But we tend to treat each new situation like it's a different thing, as if God has carried us through all of that up to this point and now he's left. Just because we can't see him and just because, like you said, all the physiological changes, your brain going a million miles a second, all of that. But what can really help is to recognize and to admit that, yeah, I don't have control. I don't. But God does, and God makes promises in his word, He knows the plans he has for us to prosper us and not to harm us, to give us a hope in a future. And trusting in that is really, really key.
Yeah. Yeah. Realization that we don't have control over a situation and that fear of losing control, because a lot of us like to think that we can control our lives. I was in that place for a very long time. And when I got a very severe case of long COVID and I saw that control completely gone from my situation, I started struggling with severe anxiety for the first time in my life. And I didn't know how to handle that because I didn't even realize and diagnose it as anxiety. But like you were saying, not only a lack of control, but that lack of control leads into a lack of trust in God. Because if we're worrying about the future, worrying about what's going to happen to us because we can't control it, then we're not trusting God with our future. We're not trusting God to hold that in his hands. And often that also looks like a lack of surrender of control to God.
I think a verse that my mom gave me that was really key when I was going through a lot of anxiety, and I just had to keep reminding myself, is be anxious for nothing, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, present your request to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Thinking how to practically do that. A lot of times I would have to, like in my mind, take whatever those stressors were, the real anxiety, things that I was recognizing. I don't have control over this, and it's really ruling my mind. And in presenting that request to God, and choosing to be anxious for nothing, I would basically leave it at the foot of the cross. And I know a lot of people say that, like, oh, take your anxieties, cast your cares on him because he cares for you. But I think what we do is we kind of set those things down at the foot of the cross, and then as we leave, we pick them back up.
Wow.
So big for me was that conscious choice. That's a big thing we talk about in our psych classes, and is in resiliency and all of that, how much choice really matters. Choosing, as I'd pray to God, as I'd write these things down, because I think journaling's great. I'll probably talk more about that later.
Yeah.
Things like that, deciding consciously, I'm laying this at the foot of the cross, and it's staying here. I'm not going to pick this back up. And so every time that thought would try to come back up, I would remind myself, no, I've set that before God. And he can handle it far better than I ever can. I don't need to pick this back up. God's bearing that burden. And for me to pick it back up is almost for me to believe I have to bear some of that weight in a situation that God's in control of. So choosing again and again and again, because I think it is a process, because our minds are very anxiety and worry prone. That's just kind of the natural wiring of it in many ways.
Yeah.
So, and again, that'll be a Bible verse I'll probably talk about later.
Yeah.
But recognizing the benefit to taking every thought captive and making it obedient to Christ. And every time it comes back, being like, no, that's in God's hands. I will not pick this back up. And choosing that again and again and again.
I do want to lead off of that because that can be something that's hard to understand. Because when we do have severe anxiety to the point where it's crippling, we often don't feel like we have a choice, right? We're talking about choosing, intentionally, consciously choosing, but anxiety makes us feel like we don't have any choice in the matter, that we don't know what to do with it, that we don't know how to handle it, because a lot of things are intertwined with anxiety. There's worry, there's fear, a lack of control. All of these things are intertwined, but also focus. Focus is a huge part of anxiety, and I do want to dive a little bit into that. So when we're talking about choice, intentionally choosing, how does choosing where our focus lays, how does that play into anxiety? Choosing where our focus goes.
So, I think a lot of focus and anxiety, like we've talked about, goes towards the future. I think anxiety many times is very future focused, while other stuff like depression and stuff is very past focused. When we're in anxiety, our focus is on future events and also on ourselves. And I know a lot of people might be thinking, when I'm in anxiety, I'm not thinking of myself. But I think a lot of times we really are, whether that would be how people think about us, how actions will affect us, stuff like that. I think back to when the Bible talks about focus on today You know what I mean?
Yeah, do not
Yeah.
worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will
Yes.
worry about itself.
Yeah. And I understand that that's such a difficult idea
Yeah.
for a lot of people struggling with anxiety because that's the verse that they hear every single time they're in their small group and people are like, oh, don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow will worry about itself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's just hard because I think just saying those words without having a clear understanding of where to go from that or like even explanations with that
Yeah,
or
without guidance.
without guidance and without empathy really gets us nowhere.
Yeah.
I think what is so important with people who have that focus on themselves in the future isn't to spit Bible verses at them about what they're doing is wrong and leave it at that. But it's instead to guide them to a place of, hey, this is what it looks like to switch focus. This
Yeah.
is what it looks like. And hey, I'm seeing this in you. I'm seeing that a lot of this focus is on yourself. Let me help you. And I understand this is hard. I understand this isn't something that you're doing for attention. Like, I understand this, but let me walk with you. You know what I mean? Instead of just, don't worry about tomorrow. Why are you worrying about it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of times, and it's just a really sad part of the church today, is that a lot of times anxiety and depression and other mental health things are seen as like this ultimate weakness, almost treated as worse than other types of sin. Yeah, sorry, that was a bit of a side tangent.
Yeah. No, but there's also that lack of support, like you were talking about.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes people can just be like, oh, just recall the Bible verses and just spit them at people and say, just get over it. Yeah, you're so right.
Yeah. What I was kind of thinking about when you're talking about focus was the inherent risk in things like anxiety and depression, which are both parts of my story. But the risk is when they shift from struggles to identity. When it's not, I'm somebody who struggles with anxiety, it's not, I'm someone who's struggling with depression, it's, I have anxiety,
Or I'm
I
an
am
anxious
depressed.
person.
Yeah, I am an anxious person.
Yeah.
I am depressed, whatever. Because I think it impacts your behaviors, and your behaviors in that really matter. I think of one thing that has been very therapeutic for me is like music, right? And definitely a lot of songs that can really, you can like identify with the words and see yourself in them. But I was talking with someone a day or two ago how the risk with that is music can help carry you through a season, but you can also carry that music into the next season with you and essentially carry that season with you, where there's not an escape because you are so used to being not somebody who struggles with anxiety, but an anxious person, not somebody who struggles with depression, but depressed. It's like letting that go becomes almost an impossibility because it's so core and integral to your identity. I think recognizing that these things are struggles, and like Ty was just saying, I think the church has a tendency to see these things as purely spiritual issues. I think there's absolutely a spiritual component to this.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely. Because the war, like the battleground the enemy wages the war on so often is our minds, absolutely. But it's also a cognitive issue. You know, that's why psychology's a science. So, a brief part of my story is there was a span of time where I was on anxiety medication. But what I appreciated about my doctor was before he prescribed it, he told me, hey, this does not replace your relationship with God. This does not. He was like, this is almost like, think of it almost like a crutch or something that will help you in the time being, just to be able to kind of get your thoughts in order, slow that down, and a lot of the physiological effects of just the absolute exhaustion that was hitting me, where like I couldn't even think very straight or go about my day very well. He was like, this medication will help you through that season, but your relationship with God is also going to be absolutely key. Your relationship with others, seeking out support, and all of that. And so a time of medication really helped me be able to seek out that kind of positive support and some counseling, time with God, building social, just good, strong friendships, godly believers. And so whenever I was off of the medication, it's like anxiety wasn't an identity. It was something I'd left
Yeah.
in the past, and God had really worked in me through that season and brought me out the other side.
Yeah. And it's important to remember that medication for it is not bad.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people will try to stay away from medication because, oh, it hasn't gotten that bad yet, or I don't want to be on medication. But it's not bad. God has given us medicine to alleviate some of the suffering of this fallen world. But it's a point as when our relationship with God becomes second and the medication becomes first. That's when it becomes a problem.
And here's what I'd say that too, is that medication and counseling, I don't think they should be stigmatized. And I appreciate so much how much less they've become stigmatized given time, and I think that's amazing. One other thing we've talked about in some of our psych classes, though, is that the client-counselor relationship or client-psychologist relationship, whoever you see, the goal shouldn't be that be an eternal thing. Sometimes it's necessary in very, very extreme cases, but there should be a point at which you have now been given the tools, and again, this is where choice comes in and behaviors, where you can help yourself, which sounds bad. I think in the church, the phrase help yourself sounds like, I don't know. But there is a point where as you're struggling with anxiety, depression, all of that, you're able to get off the medication. You're able to stop seeing a counselor, whatever, and return to life because you have been through that season. But again, it's not your identity, and you've now been given the tools to do that. And one thing I was reading the other day is how often God brings us through those seasons so then we can in turn go and benefit others who are struggling with the same thing. I think in my own experience, being a psychology major, it's like I understand because I've been there. And it's given me a greater empathy for people. I didn't enjoy the trials in the moment, obviously, but God really used those trials to strengthen my faith in so many ways, seeing how much God worked through that and was faithful even in those seasons. And now in turn being able to help other people and really have that kind of desire, just passion in my heart for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I 100% agree with everything you said. Yeah, and I think with another great thing with like the idea of like the client counselor relationship and everything is that relationship we see is the most important factor in actually doing good, right? Like medication's great, but medication can ultimately be useless without the support. And I think that's why such a big deal needs to be made in the church of being in community with each other.
Yeah.
I think that's ultimately where we grow as Christians. I think that's how we support each other is in community. And that's why I think so much of the church's growth is done in small groups. I think just the community behind that, it's integral for keeping up mental health. It's integral for keeping up your relationship with God.
Yeah.
Community is 100% vital, even with medication, because if you're not keeping up self-care and good self-care,
Yes.
because self-care can be negative.
Yeah.
Self-care can make it worse if done incorrectly. But good self-care and good community helps alleviate the symptoms of anxiety
Yeah.
and helps bring you closer to God and to a better understanding of reality.
Yes. Yeah, that's an amazing practical word there. Because when we are going on the journey of overcoming anxiety, we need to stay away from the habits and the lifestyle that will bring us closer to anxious thoughts, to anxiety. So making sure that you're taking proper care of your body, getting the rest that you need, right? It's easy to think of, but it's hard to implement, especially when we are such humans of routine and we can get caught up in bad habits and bad routine. It's so hard to break. But keeping those habits, finding community, treating your body with proper respect, choosing your focus, choosing to get help.
Yes.
These are all practical ways to start that journey of overcoming anxiety.
One other thing I was thinking about, where you're talking about, like helping yourself too, is I'm sure you could go off about this, but the book Man's Search for Meaning.
Oh, yes. Oh, I love that
Just,
book so much.
just the like anxiety has such a way of being a very internalizing type of thing. Again, like you're talking about, where there's a tendency in anxiety to kind of self-isolate and to really focus on yourself. I think that's the hard thing. Is something I've noticed is that the risk in this is it gives you a profound sense of loneliness, which is not the same as being alone. But ironically, when we're in a lonely state, we tend to get alone, and that just exacerbates the loneliness. Recognizing, like you said, the need for community, but further, how I think of an anxiety, any act takes a degree of momentum. A greater degree of momentum than normally. It's like you kind of are pushing against this brick wall, and it takes a good deal of force at the outset to get yourself to move and do anything. But once you start moving, you're able to do that with things, especially like physical things like working out, but also doing good for others. The importance of serving others just can't, like, that can't be understated, because it's so, like, command in the Bible. It's what we were made to
Yes.
do in large part. Like, that's God's command to us, is to love him and love others. And when you're in anxiety, the tendency can be so to focus on yourself and to pull yourself out of that season that you're not thinking of others.
Yeah.
And as impossible as it sounds and feels in the moment, serving others really, really helps. Like, you wouldn't think it would, because it sounds like it's an extra effort, and you feel unequipped for it because you're just in such a down state. But, so many people have said about ministry, like, God equips the called, he doesn't call the equipped. If you're going out and actively seeking to serve God to a healthy limit, you don't want to make a martyr of yourself and just make situations worse. But if you are actively going out and doing God's will, he will bless that. And it really, really does help mentally. Like, incredibly. It helps so much in the middle of that. So choosing to go and make that little push, as hard and impossible as it seems, to serve others is a massive practical thing you can do in the middle of anxiety and depression, either way.
Yeah, I mean, like, I hope you don't mind if I just, like, go straight up with some more practical ways
Go ahead. Yeah.
of combating anxiety.
Yeah.
But, like, I think a lot of what goes with that is this idea of self-discipline. And like Grant's been saying, it's incredibly hard going into it. But the self-discipline to not only go out and do stuff with people, to not only stick in your word, to not only take care of your body, which is all very difficult and very energy consuming in the moment, will make you feel better, but also the discipline to learn to combat your own thoughts. A big thing that we learn, and that my boy Viktor Frankl, he wrote Man's Search for Meaning.
Okay.
Basically, the book focuses around Viktor Frankl's experiences in the concentration camps.
Yeah.
In you guys know what I'm talking about, the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Right? He was a Jew, very devout Jew, and still seemed to be after that. Was a psychologist, and he went through the concentration camps. And a big thing that he talks about, and that I think is very applicable, is combating thoughts and the agency that we have to change those thoughts. Something he talks about, the prisoners that survived, the prisoners that made it through, changed their way of thinking out of their downward spiral and just pushed forward. You know what I mean? And that's like some of the worst living conditions I've ever read about. Like some of the stuff he writes about is just horrifying. But I think he speaks so much practical and honest solutions to anxiety. It's taking the thoughts that you have and, like the Bible says, holding them captive. Changing those thoughts when you have the thought, this is terrible, everybody hates me, which, again, is not all anxiety. Some anxiety is different. But when you have that thought, it's taking that, let's examine the evidence. Is this true? And then being like, no, people don't hate me. No, this isn't accurate. Let's change this. And still speaking truth to yourself,
Yeah.
because it's important what we say to ourselves is true. Like me telling myself that I'm phenomenal at basketball would be a lie, and I know that. So that would lead it to be even worse. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But and the great thing once again about community is you have people able to call you out and lead you forward with that, right? And so like I'll come to my boys sometimes and I'll be like, guys, I'm like really sad about graduation and I'm really anxious about what the future looks like in my relationship with you guys. And then they'll be like, hey, I understand that, but let me tell you about how reality's going to look. Yes, our relationship's going to change, but sometimes change is okay. And it's not like you're going to lose us. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
Yes, yes. Combating thoughts, choosing where our focus of our mind goes. It's so important. That's a huge part of my story with anxiety. The story is going to sound on such a lower level compared to the Holocaust, but I'm still going to share it anyways because it was very personal. So around the same time that I was on the journey of overcoming anxiety, and it was still reoccurring every now and then, I started working at the Whitewater Center. Second day on the job, was driving back on the highway in the fast lane, and all of a sudden I just hear a loud pop noise on the right front tire. And I don't think about it too much, but then I start hearing like a little clanking sound continuing to rattle, and the car I'm driving it just starts to shake a little bit more. And if you're in a car going 80 miles down a freeway in the fast lane when this starts happening, it can be very anxiety inducing. But what's amazing about that moment is that I chose to focus on God. I chose to rehearse some thoughts in my mind saying, God, I thank you that you are protecting this car. God, I thank you that you have my life in your hands and that I am saved. I am in your kingdom. I thank you that you love me. And that kept me in a spot where I didn't have an anxiety attack in that moment, because if I had, I don't know if that would have resulted well. But thank the Lord, with that focus, I was able to slowly shift lanes over and over into the very rightmost lane, just pull over by the side. And my right front tire was just completely blown out. Yeah. It was just a miracle that I got out of that unscathed. But yet again, that's because God led me to focus on him in that moment. That kept me at peace. It kept me peaceful. That kept me secure in him. And it's just so amazing when we think about combating thoughts. A lot of people think that you can't control your thought life, but you can. It takes a different type of discipline that we're used to and that we're taught about. But it's possible with the Lord's help.
Yeah, I think we see really the criteria for that in Philippians 4:8, which again, like Ty was talking about, starts out with whatever's true, and then whatever is good, whatever is lovely, whatever is honorable, because I think we can sometimes convince ourselves those negative thoughts might be true, but like you said, identifying that kind of cognitive distortion, weighing the evidence, just examining the evidence, what's actually true. Simultaneously, I don't think we should ever be at a place where we are so fragile that we can't take criticism or conviction. You know, not saying that your negative thoughts about yourself are right, because usually they're very catastrophic thoughts of minor thing leads to slightly bigger minor thing and goes and goes and goes and goes, and it's blown way out of proportion. But if somebody offers some sort of criticism or something like that, that's not always a bad thing, and that doesn't speak to your character. Again, identity.
Yeah.
If you're letting that get to your very heart, you're placing a lot more identity in that than you should. Recognizing that it's your truest friends often who offer criticism. I think it's Proverbs where it says the wounds of a friend are trustworthy, but the kisses of an enemy are excessive. Where if it's a friend talking to you about these things, that's because they love you and they want the very best for you. If you're in a really dark place and somebody comes to you and is like, hey man, like you don't seem to be doing that great, like what's going on? That's not them saying anything negative per se about you. That's their legitimate concern for you and them wanting the very best for you.
Yeah.
And Ty was talking about practical things. I have a few other practical things I wrote down in my own life. I think, again, the benefit of writing and journaling cannot be understated. Definitely in your Bible time, like in your time with God, you should be absolutely journaling, even if it's just brief, like observations and prayer and all that. I think that's huge. One thing that I've utilized is when thoughts get so loud and chaotic and out of control, doing almost what you call like a brain dump, which is just open up a journal and just write and just start writing and keep writing. And it takes a lot of time. Like when I did it for the first time, it probably took like 3 hours maybe, but not, it's going to sound weird, but not thinking about your thoughts too much. Just as the thoughts come, writing them down, writing them down, writing them down. And if a thought from earlier comes back, write it down again and just keep going until you can't write anymore. And eventually you'll reach that place where you can't write anymore because it's all written out. And then you can examine it if you want to and see kind of where are my thoughts going. Even if the thoughts don't necessarily make sense or seem unfair to write, you still need to write that down because that's something that's in your head and that's something you probably need to deal with because otherwise you're just stuffing it back down. And the thought and that belief is still there. And in writing it out, it's tangible. You don't have to carry those thoughts anymore. They're now written out on paper, and you can really look back through those and see what are the associations, the trails of thought my mind is just carrying all the time, and why are they there, and then proceed to deal with them.
Yes.
And one other thing is I have a really, really good friend who's really stressed to me recently the importance of appreciating the little things. Just in
We actually
seasons.
did a whole episode on.
Did you really?
Yes, with
Really?
Abdullah and Easton, actually.
Yeah.
Cherishing Every Moment, episode 14. You should go check it out. But
check it out.
please, continue.
But just recognizing in times where, sometimes in seasons of anxiety and depression, they are circumstantial and things aren't good.
Yeah.
There's been a death, or you're moving locations, or just there's so much work and there's so much going on, and you can't control that. You can't change the externals. Recognizing that even in times where on the macro big level things aren't going the best, there are still small things. I remember like me and you were having like dinner out on Merritt like a few months ago. We were just chilling. You're like, it's a beautiful day. I was like, yeah, it is. I was like, yeah. It was like the sunset. I was like, yeah. Like I don't stop and just see that enough. You know, we don't give ourselves moments to stop and just appreciate the beauty of what God has made. Or just the kind word of presence of a friend. Think about when a friend comes up and says, hey, you're like, man, I didn't even know who this person was years ago, you know? And that was the season where I was praying for friends, and that person is an answered prayer from God. Things like that we forget. Appreciating those things can really give you a perspective that there's still hope in the middle of that. I think hope is the biggest thing God has been teaching me this year, and big to this, hope being a desire and the expectation that desire will be fulfilled. And God does promise a lot of what we truly do deeply desire, and if God promises it, we can expect that he will fulfill that. Not always as we expect, but God does always uphold his promises.
Yeah. Yeah. At this point in the episode, we've talked a lot about the diagnosis of anxiety, talking about where it comes from, why we have it. And we've gone over so many practical ways that can help you overcome it for sure. But it's important to remember not to take a perfectionist route when dealing with this. With all this advice, these are all good things, but if you try to implement them all at once into your schedule and try to do every single one of them at the same time, it's eventually going to fall apart. And if you try to approach it as I need to do everything in order to overcome my anxiety, as you see that falling apart and crumbling apart, you're going to get more anxious. It's just going to happen. We by ourselves can do nothing. It's only through the strength of Jesus Christ that we are able to do anything. And I think that's something that you cannot under stress is the spiritual side of anxiety and the spiritual side of depression. Ultimately, in the Bible, it says it scores of time. Do not fear, right? Do not be afraid, because fear is rooted in a lack of trust in God and a lack of control over our life. And God does not want us to be in a place where we are afraid, where we are worrying about the future. But the enemy does. The enemy wants to put us in a place where we are. There is such a push, even in the church, to normalize anxiety. I saw an Instagram post a while ago that just said, front slide, anxiety isn't a sin. And I saw them like, no, hold up. Yes, it is. It is a sin. It's hard to admit, but it is a sin, because Jesus in Matthew, in the Beatitudes, we just talked about it, talks about do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Paul talks about do not be anxious about anything, but in everything with prayer and petition, make your requests be known to God. We are called to cast all our anxieties on God, for he cares for us. And so we can't get in a place where we normalize anxiety so much to where it's part of our identity. We have to realize it is a sin, it is a problem, and it's through the grace of God that we're able to overcome it.
Yeah. Can I also speak on that a bit?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say yes, 100%. We need to understand the sin that comes along with that, right? But we also need to understand the love of God through that. I mean, I think of the story of Elijah. I mean, Elijah just absolutely, forgive my phrasing, clowned on the prophets of Baal,
Yeah.
right? He killed all of them. And then Jezebel comes up and she's like, hey, I'm going to kill you. And if I don't kill you, may your God and my God kill me. You know what I mean? And Elijah is just stricken with anxiety and depression. He can't do anything except for run over, go to a tree, and pray to God, God, let me die. And as he's laying there, God sends an angel to him. And he says, hey, I brought you food, right? And, hey, take care of yourself. I'm going to do great things through you. But Elijah still, even after this, is like, hey, I want to die. So he just goes to bed again, and God keeps coming. And then God takes him to the mountain. And all of these natural events happen. There's an earthquake, a wildfire, a storm, but God wasn't in any of those. God was in the still yet gentle whisper. And then God revealed himself to Elijah. And he even said, hey, I'm not going to leave you alone. I'm going to give you Elisha, right? And I think that's the understanding that God wasn't happy with Elijah in that moment. God wasn't like, hey, this anxiety's all right. He was like, get up. But while he was saying get up, he met him where he was. Just like God meets us in our sin. God reaches down to grab us. God lowered himself to the position of a man and died for us. Like what more is there to God lowering himself to us, right? To coming to make us righteous.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Such a good word.
it's not that anxiety is okay. It's not that anxiety is not a sin, but God loves us and continues to pursue us in our anxiety,
Yes.
right? And sometimes our own thoughts of how wicked we are actually drive us away from God because we think God can't love us, or that this this thing that we struggle with is an act of repulsion to God, which it is, but God still reaches to us through it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And it's the blood of Jesus Christ that he's able to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd say that for anybody, or most anybody at least, anxious thoughts will come and fear and all that. What really matters is what you do with that. And that's where sin comes in, right? It's who we rely on, who we would trust in. Like you said with Elijah, God had him not stay in that. Simultaneously, like you were saying, you can reach a point where it's like, oh, I'm just a dirty sinner, and you wouldn't want to turn to like medication or any of that because you're like, oh, this is a sin struggle. I need to just deal with it before God. And you do, absolutely. But those kinds of things can help. And like you were saying, going back to what you're saying at the start
Yeah.
of your thing about healing, don't speed run healing. You can't speed run healing. And I think we like to think that we can of, oh, I'm seeing a counselor now. Oh, I'm on medications. So the goal is to take this, go to like 3 counseling appointments or take medication for the minimal amount of time as possible until I can just shove these things down to the bottom of the barrel and not worry about them. It's like, no, you can't speed run healing. And that's a big part of the uniqueness of people. There's no universal form of grief, of dealing with anxiety. It's different for lots of people in the same way healing is different for a lot of people. So long as you're actively seeking healing in whatever form, like you said, we've given a lot of practical things and a lot more practical things. We are definitely not experts or authorities really in this field, just speaking from experience and what we've learned in classes, but seeking healing to the fullest extent, recognizing that complete and total healing only does come through Christ, a recognition that he's the one in control, but at the same time, it is a process. It takes time, and I think you have to recognize that you're not a failure because maybe it's taking you a little bit longer than somebody else to heal, because maybe we like to look at healing as linear, as a purely upward slope, but there are times, as discouraging as it is, that you're going up and you suddenly dip. And you feel like you've regressed all this way, right? But that's also part of healing a lot of times. It's not always a linear upward slope. There are moments where you dip. There are moments where you fail, where you stumble and fall. But again, to get back up and keep pursuing that and to keep moving is huge.
And I also think, like, going with that about like healing not being linear, sometimes that's so hard for us because we believe in a powerful God. We believe in an active, powerful God. And yet, sometimes it can feel like we're abandoned. Sometimes it just does feel like that in our anxiety, in our depression, in our mental health struggles. It feels like God's abandoned us. And we do, like, sometimes we think in like all bad situations, like whether that be something physically, medically wrong, mentally, we think, God, why won't you just immediately heal now? Right? And that's a hard struggle. But I think, and I don't have all the answers. I don't. But I know people out there, is probably people listening to this podcast, are listening to this and they feel, then why won't God heal me now? Like, if he's done it before, if he's shown it before, why won't he heal me now? Right? And I think first we don't know God's ways, and I can't claim to fully know it. But I think that God, in a sense, sometimes he knows that allowing us to go through the struggle, allowing us to be able to heal this way, not only will it bring us closer, make us closer with him, but also just imagine the testimony that comes with that. Think of all the opportunities that we have now because we've been through these anxiety struggles, to be able to talk to non-believers, right? Think of if God miraculously healed that. I think our testimony to those people might be a bit lower, like might hit less, because they would think you didn't go through what I went through. You prayed and it was gone. You know what I mean? And I'm not trying to say that God's inflicting anxiety on us or keeping us in a state of anxiety because he wants us to feel grateful to him.
He's definitely not doing that.
That's not at all how it is.
Yeah.
But it's the fact that God uses that. Yeah. And I hope that wasn't too big of a side tangent.
No, it's a hard concept to grasp. As you were talking about that, I was just reminded of a verse, and I don't have the reference off the top of my head, but it goes, "Our earthly parents punished us for a time as they thought best, but the Lord disciplines us for our good so that we may share in his holiness." And that's a paraphrase. I don't have it completely accurate to the translation, but it's a hard concept to grasp. Because you're so right. Suffering does not come from God, right? But he does allow suffering. He does allow hardship in our lives. It's true that we're going to go through hills and we're going to go through valleys, but he's there in the midst of it all. And he's going to use the suffering that we go through for good. He works all things for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. So just as you said, right now, if you're struggling with anxiety, when God gets you on the other side of this, he's going to have such a powerful testimony written on your life, and you're going to be able to help so many people. And if you know anyone that struggles with anxiety, encourage them. Encourage them with what we talked about today. Just the how present God is with it, these practical ways in which they can actually overcome this, because it can seem like there's no way out, especially with depression, loss of hope. But there's always a way out, for sure. I think that does wrap it up for today's episode. So, boys, thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of the Audacious podcast. But before we close, I do want to ask one more question. What's one piece of advice or encouragement that you'd like to leave with the listeners for their week ahead?
I'd say anxiety is not a uncommon thing. You are not alone in your struggles. And find community. Get in your church. Get connected. Get with your friends. And as much as you can, pour into them and have them pour into you. Let it be a two-way street. And you're going to find so much meaning from God, and you're going to find so much power and healing there.
What I'd say is, I think I said this last time I was on the podcast, but one thing is, as you're reading through scripture, look for that word hope. See how often it crops up, see what it's found in, how often it's promised, and just hold on to hope. And also I'd say that all the things I say, like I say as someone who has been through anxiety, like intensely through depression and anxiety, but God has brought me out the other side. So I can confidently say that depression, anxiety are not the end. And I really do know how much it feels like it in the moment. I really do. And I think just hear me say that it's not the end, even though healing may not happen in the time frame, in the way, whatever else that you may want it to. God still has plans for your life. And whatever is going on right now has not taken him by surprise by any means. There's still hope and there's still a future.
Amen. Amen. Again, Ty, Grant, thank you so much for coming out on today's episode of the Audacious podcast. This has been great.
Thank you.
Woo.
I've
Woo.
enjoyed it. Woo.
Woo.
Yeah.
And as always, I'm your host, Talon Bobby, hoping that you have an amazing rest of your week, and we will catch you next time for week 3 of the Help and Healing series. Catch you later. Bye-bye.
Michael, don't leave me here. Michael.
What? What is going on?
Ba 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 ba. Here come the nuns. Ba ba ba.
What?
Ba.
What?
And this was Grant's final episode on the Audacious podcast.
Help me.
He was never invited back.
Help me. I'm being held hostage. Hear me out. The Smash Bros. Universe.
They have Mario.
good.
They have Detective Pikachu. They have
do.
Shadow. They have all the Pokemon, actually. They're making a Solid Snake movie.
They're making the live-action Legend of Zelda.
Yeah. So like,
I'm actually mildly sad that it's live action.
no, I am too. But I think it would be so chaotic because you have the Illumination animation style, the Sony
Yeah.
live action animation style, live action characters,
Test.
the Sonic the Hedgehog
Test,
from
test.
Paramount.
Minions
Yeah.
appear in the Smash Brothers multiverse.
Dude,
Do you imagine?
Yes.
dude, who else
Oh.
would they have?
Hear me out though.
Pac-Man.
Yeah,
They bring the
yeah.
Pac-Man from Pixels.
They just do like a like rabbit. What
Who
was
Framed
it?
Roger Rabbit? Yeah.
Who Framed
Yeah.
Roger Rabbit
Yeah.
type thing.
Or even like Detective Pikachu and Sonic.
Yeah.
Same thing. Animated characters, real life.
Yeah.
Yeah. It'd just be weird because Mario would still be cartoon. Unless they got Chris Pratt.
Unless Chris Pratt was actually Mario.
Unless they pulled a Space Jam
that
type
would
thing.
be amazing.
Yes.
Yeah. But I'm so here for it. Like, I think it'd be amazing.
I think we should talk about the elephant in the room.
Okay.
Jerry over there, our good old elephant. He's my best friend.
I know, but Talon wouldn't let him on the podcast. He looks
I
really
know.
sad.
He does look.
I think he's
really
content to listen. You know, I think if you're asking me, I think Talon wants him to be able to see like how the process works,
sad. Oh yeah.
so that eventually he can be better prepared to be on an episode. I think that's the hope.
I think it's just crazy that he's only been put in the editing role so far.
He's really good at it though.
He really is.
He's
You're so
really
right.
speedy.
You're so right.
Because he can like 2 of his hooves he can edit, and then like use his trunk to like triple edit.
That's so true.
Super fast.
Yeah. I heard even his tail can edit.
How does that work? Is he like
He has a separate screen back there.
really?
Yeah.
How does that work if he can't see it?
He has polarized sunglasses so he can see
Oh
behind
yeah,
him.
I had those. You know, like the Spy Gear toys.
I do
Remember those?
know the Spy Gear
yeah,
toys.
I had glasses with little mirrors on the side. I was
Yeah.
like, they'll never know I
They'll
can see
never
them. Sometimes I'd like walk into a room, but walk in backwards. Like they don't. I'd be like, they don't know I can actually see them. That's so cool. Like I'd intentionally not face people. Like, oh hey, Dad.
Oh my gosh.
It felt really cool.
I want
I
that
just
to
wear
be.
them around. And
I want that to be like a character in like a show or like a book, just like walks backwards and he thinks he's so cool because he can see people through the mirrors.
Get the show on the road, shall we?
Let's go.
Yeah.
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 Boys.
Men.
Yeah, we're men die. Boys
forgot
no
about
longer. Yeah.
Sorry, you guys are all 21. I'm still 20. I'm not really.
Child.
When's your birthday?
Get out.
July.
July. Okay. Wait, I'm over a year older than you?
You are, yeah.
That's wild. And you're graduating before me.
Yeah.
Who would have
Look
thought?
at that.
Who would have thought? And welcome back to the.
So sorry.
No, you're so.
How many bloopers are you gonna have out of this?
A ridiculous amount. I think this podcast episode, like the bloopers, are just gonna be longer than the
Hey
podcast.
guys, we're
We're
gonna talk
15
about
minutes in. We are 15 minutes
coming at you
in.
live to talk about depression,
Anxiety.
anxiety. Woo.
Oh no.
Okay.
Anyways,